Hmm? Why is there no sound? What the hell? Hello? Hello? Where's my sound? Sound, where are you? Why do I have no sound? Okay. Hello, sound. What's going on?
Church across the world that calls themselves Christian believes doctrines established by the proto-Orthodox Christians in the first 400 years.
Okay. So let's go back and act like none of this happened.
Let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4 steps I take from my bed to the floor. 5, 6, 7, 8. Will today be rough or will today be great? 9, 10, 11, 12. Lately I've been going through hell. 13, 14, 15, 16. Today's the day. Are you coming? Are you I'm sick of being normal? I'm sick of being average. I'm sick of being mortal. I'm about to be a savage. I see a lot of things that I want, I will have them. I got a new mindset that I just established. I'll march through the cold with the nails on the pavement. I'll shovel that coal just to get out the basement. My story will be told, helping others make changes. I'll be so bold, they will watch in amazement.
Am I gonna face it? Am I gonna chase it? Am I gonna start over? I keep waiting. Time is limited, quickly fading. Get my mind right, it's my time to take it. Am I gonna face it? Am I gonna chase it? Am I gonna start over? I keep waiting. Time is limited, quickly fading. Get my mind right, it's my time to take it.
Foot up on the pedal, pushing hard to the metal. Make a deal with the devil. Channel rage through my vessel into something that is special. Energy of a rebel, going up a level. I just wanna be greatness. I could feel changes. Turn a new page and tie up my laces. I will be the bravest. Break out of my cages. I will not be nameless. I will not be aimless.
Am I gonna chase it? Am I gonna start over? I keep waiting. Time is limited, quickly fading. Get my mind right, it's my time to take it. Am I gonna face it? Am I gonna chase it? Am I gonna start over? I keep waiting. Time is limited, quickly fading. Get my mind right, it's my time to take it.
Okay. So today we're going to be doing one thing initially, and then we might do a second video later on. So we are going to start off with some Bart Ehrman stuff. Actually, a person taking one of the courses. I don't know if they're taking the course or if they're just reading the book that I've taken. And it's going to be a different perspective. This is an atheist. Actually, I think it's a pagan. Taking on the courses and seeing their opinion. And then afterward, I'm in between doing Eva Lupine because I wanted to talk about some of the BDSM stuff that's going on as it relates to the Christian and Catholic community, because there's some heat going on there right now. And then I also want to talk about the reaction that Michael Layton had to the whole Crisis King controversy. He's coming into it a bit late. He's coming to a completely different perspective. I don't exactly agree with what he's saying, and I think he's giving a little bit of cover to Candace Owens for some reason. Maybe he wants her to come to her maybe he wants her to come to his network. Who knows? All right, so let's go ahead and do this. And like I said, I'm going to get up for a second and put on a real shirt, look more professional.
Is today's Christianity more or less diverse than shortly after Jesus' death? Hello, and welcome to my ex-Christian Bible study bonanza. I am here to help you deconstruct. We're diving into the textbook, The New Testament, by Dr. Bart D. Ehrman.
By the way, deconstruction doesn't mean leaving Christianity. You can deconstruct and still be a complete Christian. And deconstruction is actually a good idea to do because it deconstructs your preconceived notions. Now, you shouldn't deconstruct if you've never constructed. That doesn't make any sense. But basically, sometime around the age of 13, 15, 18, you start coming into contact with ideas that you haven't had before, so it's good to reassess what you know. It's also good to do that every 5 years or every 10 years to reassess your life and reassess what your knowledge is. IQ can start going down after a certain age. Things change. If you don't practice certain things, if you don't practice math, you start to lose your abilities in them. In mathematics. So there's things and reasons why you would want to do this. So deconstruction isn't just about leaving Christianity. In fact, it can actually strengthen your faith if you do it properly.
I'm an ex-Christian and biblical historian. I highly suggest you follow him on social media, get this book, and follow me, of course, as I deconstruct and share my spiritual journey. Let's jump into what I learned from chapter 1, which is titled, What is the New Testament? Christianity started out as a diverse set of beliefs, and as time went on, the beliefs became more and more narrow. Almost any church...
That's not what Bart Ehrman says in that book, and that's not the... Okay. Christianity does not start off as a diverse set of beliefs. What Bart Ehrman says is that there's no way to tell which one of the many different Christianities in the beginning is the Christianity that's the correct one. So there's the Christianity that exists with Christ, which he's going to argue is actually kind of some kind of post-Judaism or some kind of end-stage Judaism. And then you have the early Christianities, which is going to be the 12 disciples who are going to have different opinions on who Jesus was. And then that spreads out to the 70, and that spreads out to other ones. So she's not exactly getting what Bart Ehrman's saying correctly. That's okay.
Church across the world that calls themselves Christian believes doctrines established by the proto-Orthodox Christians in the first 400.
So what we call orthodoxy, Bart Ehrman calls proto-Orthodoxy, and he believes that a different form of the Christian... He believes that not truer, because that's not what he's measuring. He believes that some of the rejected forms of Christianity had a legitimate claim to the title at one point. That it's just through luck and coincidence that... coincidence is the wrong word. I have a terrible headache. Just through luck and circumstance that orthodoxy is the one that won out.
100 years of the Common Era, formerly AD, now abbreviated CE, so the 400 years after Jesus' alleged birth.
So, again, that doesn't make any sense for what the Christian claim is. 400 years after 400 years after the Gospels are written, you have the let's call it the apocryphal writings, and that's what she's talking about. All right, give me a second while I go look more professional because people have been popping in and out of my stream. Give me 1 second, okay?
But it's too late now. I remember you and me, and how careless we could be.
All day and all night, we'd stay up, it felt so right. We were so young, we were so dumb. We would get drunk and then hook up. We were okay, we were alright, staying awake till the sunrise. We were in love, couldn't stop us, like a good drug, never enough. We'd hook up in my car, driving so far, play you guitar, you'd show me your art, let down our guards, think with our hearts, stare at the stars. We were never apart, drinking too young, way too much fun, out in the sun, or pain when it's gone. Took you to prom, dance to our song, dance all night long till the lights come on. Now I remember everything, and how careless we could be.
It's an absolute fact that Christians today perpetuate the same.
What she's talking about is a few things. One of the things she's talking about is the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's actually several translations. I'm not sure if this one's the most recent one. I have a newer one as well. Hot dog it. I have an absolutely terrible headache, and that particular cat is in heat. Oh, come on. Don't make me open the door for you. Go. I do not feel like doing anything right now. Okay. The next thing she's talking about will be here. Quote-unquote Gnostic texts. This is the Shambhala Press translation. It's actually pretty good. It's a good collection. Yeah. I don't know why they call it the Gnostic Bible, but they're just trying to be catchy. I've had this for a long time. And then slightly better translation, I guess, more standardized collection. This has a bit more stuff in it. Some of it's the same, some of it's a little bit added, some added stuff to it. This is what she's talking about. Anyway, they're written long after what Bart Ehrman calls proto-orthodoxy is settled. So.
Squabbles as those in the early days, namely the "who is a real Christian" question. You've seen it, I've seen it, we've all gotten comments about it. Real Christians don't act that way, so why are you criticizing all Christians? I'm going to break it to you. Yes. Yes, they do. So the question is, what
the hell does she just say? Oh, this person has too much anger. This might not be a good watch after all.
As time went on, the beliefs became more and more narrow. Almost any church across the world that calls themselves Christian believes doctrines established by the proto-Orthodox Christians in the first 400 years.
Proto-Orthodox is just Orthodox. That's just Bart Ehrman's term for them.
Years of the Common Era, formerly AD.
Is she just reading his text?
Now abbreviated CE, so the 400 years after Jesus' alleged birth.
You know, I took 2 of his courses based on this book, and if you actually listen to the way that he talks about it, he doesn't have any of this hatred or venom toward Christianity.
It is an absolute fact that Christians today perpetuate the same squabbles as those in the early days, namely the "who is a real Christian" question.
So, yeah, we're not debating the heresies that are declared heresies. We all agree that those heresies are heresies. The outside people who want to claim to be Christian that believe in those heresies are not Christian. And I know that Dan McKellen, who I was going to actually play before this video, but I forgot to set that up. Dan McKellen argues that those distinctions don't really matter, that definitions aren't real. I don't agree with Dan at all. Definitions are real. Definitions are describing real things. So while the words we use to describe the real things might change, the real things don't change. They're actual things. So definitions are real. And therefore, we have a right to define ourselves, and we define who is and isn't of us. That's just how it is. So Catholicism, Orthodoxy, anything of the original 5 patriarchs, or the original 12 churches, or the original 77, I guess, apostolate churches, all of those are legitimate Christianity. And they all got to define themselves. And that's what the ecumenical councils are about. The ecumenical councils distinctly describe what Christianity is and what Christianity isn't. And to deny that is lunacy. Not even the scholars who argue against those definitions argue against Orthodoxy being a thing and argue against Christianity defining itself through those councils. What they're saying is that the Bible doesn't define those things. And fair enough, those councils come after the Bible. It's a fair point. But to say that those councils don't exist is a lie. And it is a cowardly way out because you have a problem with the Bible. You can acknowledge the councils and acknowledge the development of the religion without denying that Christians have a right to self-identify and to self-define themselves. Now I got a stupid hair in the way. Dog it. It's one of those days.
You've seen it, I've seen it, we've all gotten comments about it. Real Christians don't act that way, so why are you...
Real Christians have to follow, true Christianity has to follow the subset of the foundations of the church fathers and the foundations of Jesus. If you don't understand that, then you're not a Christian. It's just that easy. Now, if you're a child and you don't understand it, that's a different story because you weren't educated, you weren't catechized properly.
Criticizing all Christians? I'm going to break it to you. Yes. Yes, they do. So the question is, what...
No, they don't. Read the ecumenical councils. Find out what Christianity is. Stop talking nonsense.
What is a real Christian? My definition, which you're free to disagree about, but that's what we use here on my page, is anyone who, 1, says they follow Jesus, and
anybody can say they follow Jesus and Jesus will still reject them.
2, calls themselves a Christian. I do not...
Nope. Neither of those are qualifiers. Those are not the qualifiers that Jesus used. Jesus says, many will come to me and say, Lord, Lord, we have followed you. We have cast out demons in your name. And he will say, get away from me, I never knew you. So that is not the definition of Christian. Nice try, though. Goes good with your look, arrogance, and smug. But nope, not correct.
Not accept the no true Scotsman fallacy. It's
not a no true Scotsman fallacy. We have a right to define who we are. I can argue who is and isn't Hispanic. I can argue who is or isn't in my martial arts group that I taught. We get to define ourselves. I get to decide who or who does not qualify as a pancreationist according to my understanding of pancreation. And each denomination also gets to do the same thing for themselves. That's not which faith we are in. Where the faith we're in is Christianity. That's the large thing, the faith. But the denominations are individual things. And the religion that we're in is sort of encompasses all three. So you think of those three circles. Faith is here, religion's over here, and religion's like the big one, and then faith, then denomination, then sect. It's kind of how it goes. Then you get to decide who's in that little circle with you. It's how it is.
Takes attention off incredible.
Like we get to decide who's an American and who's not an American. You might not like it, but we get to do it. Or if you're in Canada, you get to decide who's a Canadian, who's not a Canadian, who's Chinese and who's not Chinese. China gets to decide who is and who isn't one of them. You don't have to like it, but that's reality.
Incredibly important issues and puts it onto some straw man that distracts us from things we need to be discussing as a culture. No, thank you. In the early days of Christianity, there were
If she calls herself a Christian, I'm going to laugh my ass off.
varied beliefs, but in the textbook, Dr. Ehrman highlights three main groups whose beliefs differ from what we today think of as Christians. First were the Ebionites. The Ebionites
Okay. I should have brought over against heresies. I should have brought my Athanasius. Is it Eusebius? No, it's not Eusebius. Athanasius? Athanasius? Irenaeus? I got such a headache.
Ebionites believed Jesus was an amazing man chosen by God, but that he wasn't divine.
Judaizers, Arians, blah, blah, blah. These are called heresies.
To call Jesus God was a blasphemous lie. And Paul, who allegedly wrote 13 books of the current-day Bible, was the worst kind of heretic.
Paul is not a heretic. Nobody thinks Paul is a heretic. Nobody in the Christian world thinks Paul is a heretic. If you think Paul is a heretic, you've officially pushed yourself out of Christianity.
Can kind of relate to these guys because even as an ex-Christian, I sort of believe both those things. Jesus isn't God, Paul is an asshole. The most important part of the Ebionites' belief was that to become a Christian, you first had to become Jewish.
That's called Judaizing.
After all, in Matthew 5:17, Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Oops, just a second. There was no New Testament back then. I bring that verse up to show that some of these heretical beliefs made it into the Bible, which further helps us deconstruct.
That's not true.
What we were taught since we're seeing the emperor's clothes. So we've got the Ebionites who say that Jesus was chosen and you need to become Jewish to become Christian. Then we have the Marcionites. The Marcionites built their platform around.
So the Ebionites being heretics, whatever. The Marcionites being heretics, they are actual heretics. They're actually arch heretics. So, yeah.
Anti-Semitism, which definitely made it into current-day Christianity.
No. Anti-Semitism is not part of Christianity.
They went on and on about the Hebrew Bible portraying an evil, vengeful God, and the God of the New Testament being all, God is love and light. By the way, that means they believed in two gods, not one. And what about Jesus? Well, Jesus didn't.
Two gods. More like a false god and a true god. And the false god was the ruler of this world, and the true God was outside of the world. Not really two gods, but a false god and a true god. You're confusing it with... Oh, which one's the dualistic one?
Didn't have a body. He was actually some kind of divine phantasm who didn't suffer any physical pain when he died. The Marcionites' conception of holy writings was pretty much opposite of the Ebionites.
But can you say it without anger?
Since they thought Paul was the shit and Jewish law needed to be kicked to the curb. No Old Testament, a bunch of Paul's letters, and shortened versions.
I don't know. You're just giving me vibes that you've never actually read the ecumenical councils.
versions of the Gospels that we know today were their jam. Now we're at my favorite heretical Christian group, the Gnostics. I always root for the underdog, so I just love them. Now, in this textbook, the Gnostics' beliefs are simplified. One of the prevailing theories today is that the people we call Gnostics had varying beliefs among themselves. Unfortunately, the Gnostics
No, there's no one single group called the Gnostics. That's a lie. That's incorrect. So Bart Ehrman is an expert in the Gnostics, so he would not make this kind of mistake in his lessons, let alone in his book. So there's pagan Gnostics. The cult of Isis is a very famous Gnostic group. There are atheistic Gnostics. There's scientism. How do you say scientismers who are Gnostic. This would be people coming out of the kind of like a neo Pythagorean cult, closer to Jesus' time and also post-Christianity. But there are Gnostics that combine with the Pythagorean cults. And then there's the, like I said, the Isis one, the Isis Gnostic version. There's several Isis cults, but yeah, the Gnostic one's interesting. I think one of these actually has one of the pagan ones in here. I'm not sure which one. Hold on. Give me a second. I think one of these is the... Where is it? Hold on. Well, there's the Maccanean, although I don't really know if I'd consider Maccanean. And there's the Zohar Kabbalah stuff that kind of feeds into the Gnostic text, but the Gnostic and Zoharism are not the same. There's also Jewish pseudepigrapha and stuff like that. Where are you? It's narrative, histories, narratives. Come on, I know there's... Where are you? This one. I'll look in the other one. Let's let her keep talking.
had some anti-Semitic beliefs as well. Everybody was a real mess back then. But they have such a fascinating cosmology that many books have been written about them. Let's get to the basics. They thought that God, as worshipped by Jews and other Christians, was a twisted being that created the world with suffering in it because he's evil. He has his own realm, which he thinks is heaven, but he's wrong. The true heavenly realm is far bigger and far beyond him, and Jesus was sent from that celestial realm to tell us that God is a liar and a malevolent being. Who doesn't love this fucking drama? They had a bunch of other texts that didn't make it into the Bible. They liked the New Testament Gospel of John, but they also had Gospels of Mary, Philip, Judas, Peter, Thomas, and some others. These books disappeared off.
I got them right here. They are... when you read them, and even Bart Ehrman says this himself in his lessons and on his, when he does podcasts on these or guest lectures on them, you can tell very much right away, not only that they were written later after a much more deeper Christology had been developed, but you can tell right away why they are rejected by orthodoxy, or as he calls it, proto-orthodoxy. You can tell immediately why they're rejected. Now, Bart Ehrman has a very interesting theory that the seats, and I kind of agree with him, just to be fair, not kind of, I agree with him on this part, that there has to be some kind of presence of proto-Gnosticism, not just from the ancient Gnostic cults that were still around. Some of them were around up until the 19th century, but some of the Gnostic cults, it seems as if some of the letters were writing against these Gnostic ideas.
The earth for a while, but we have portions of most of them now, which we found at Nag Hammadi in 1945. And they are fascinating. I want you to remember, the Gnostics are real Christians. They called themselves Christians.
The Gnostics are not real Christians. They're not even close. They're not even a little bit close. They have nothing to do with orthodoxy. Calling yourself a Christian doesn't make you a Christian. Oh, this is so stupid.
They insisted that they were Christians. They argued with other Christians about who was a real Christian. But most importantly, Jesus' time on earth was pivotal to their beliefs. That
Again, they're writing about 400 years after Christ. They have nothing to do with original Christianity. Not even a little bit. You got the founding of the church at Pentecost. You have the development of that church into what we call Catholic. You have that Catholic church turning into a hierarchy. You have the development of the patriarchs. You then have the separation of the first major schism, or minor schism as it was called, which comes to the first council. You got Nicaea, followed up by, I forget what the next council is. Anyway, you have the councils going from there. So you can see Christianity continue to go from the Bible. It's not as if the Bible is written and then everything in Christian history stops until we get to today, and now there's MacArthur writing his own Bible. No. The church fathers continue writing. There are other inspired works outside of the Bible, works that the church fathers call inspired. Now, it might mean something different than what we mean today, but that term was being used for other works. These church father writings then develop into the councils and the council writings and the council notes. And you have then, while the councils are going on, you also have what's called doctors of the faith to help guide orthodoxy, whether it's Eastern or Latin, whether it's Eastern or Western Orthodoxy, which one would be Catholic and one would be Eastern Orthodox after this great schism. So, and then even in the schism to follow, which is Protestantism and Catholicism, when they split apart, you still have the Reformation documents where you can follow the development of Christianity in Reformation format all the way up until today. So what you're saying is just not true. Orthodoxy protects itself against these heresies over and over and over again, even while fighting amongst ourselves.
That is a Christian. So the final group the textbook talks about is the Proto-Orthodox Christians. These guys are the precursor to the Catholic Church and all churches across the world today.
That's what I just said. Except we're not in the 400s. We're there in the beginning. That is the church that founds. That is Tertullian and Origen and all the ante-Nicene fathers. They're all Christian, all Catholic, all Orthodox. They later get labeled, some of the other ones get labeled as unorthodox once orthodoxy solidifies. So I'm not saying there's not any development. No one's arguing there's not any development. There clearly has to be. But once it solidifies and they start looking back at people like Origen and Tertullian, since Origen and Tertullian were asking the questions more than giving the answers, that will lead into the solidification of orthodoxy. Some of the questions that they asked led to later people adopting their name and developing heresies under their name, but that's not the actual church fathers or ante-Nicene fathers doing that. That's later people taking their questions and going in the opposite direction of orthodoxy. All this is documented, by the way, so you don't have to take this person's opinion. And you don't even have to agree with Bart Ehrman's opinion on it. You can actually go read the documents and read the arguments yourself.
Except for a handful that were hidden away for a long, 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 long time. And they're the clear winner of the war, and it was a war between all these groups.
It wasn't a war. Christians didn't get martial power until, not even with Constantine, I would say a little bit after Constantine. And then they don't even get political power right away either. So political power develops, and some Protestants have viewed that development of political and martial power as a great tragedy, as Protestants themselves use that martial power to kill each other and to also kill Catholics. And of course, Catholics do their own fair bit of inquisitioning.
They're the ones that ended up writing the Nicene Creed, and they decided which books made it into the Bible. The lie that we need
No, whoa, 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 back up, back up, back up, back up, back up. Bart Ehrman would never make that kind of mistake and say that a council decided what was in the Bible. Bart Ehrman's too careful for that. You're misreading or misinterpreting what he's saying. So, first off, let's not worry about open or closed canon. Let's just talk about the canon. There was a semi-solidified canon before Jesus came on the scene. The Old Testament was mostly settled. The only questions would be what we call the Deuterocanon in Catholicism or the Apocrypha in Protestantism. But those books, which are sometimes called the Catholic Apocrypha by certain fringe leaders in the Protestant movement, that's the only thing in debate there. The Pseudepigrapha, nobody agreed with. Nobody allowed the Pseudepigrapha in. And when I say nobody, I mean nobody within the Orthodox Jewish movement. Whether it be Pharisee or whatever else. If you're in an official place, you're not taking these books in. In Christianity, you already had the pairing up of the Gospels pretty quick, and you had the choosing of which Gospels, which schools were the correct schools. That happens to be the one that I agree with is the development of the Gospel is that someone said it first, possibly an eyewitness, which he would have spoke in Aramaic. That they then spread the word. A school, which means a church, Jewish word shul, a synagogue, church split. You have founding of new churches. Synagogue and church used to be the same thing. So you have founding of new churches. In these new churches, some of them survive. Those that survive, they become schools. The students of or the disciples of these founders of these schools end up being the ones who write the Bible, and they write the Bible in Koine Greek and not Aramaic. What I'm saying is not shocking, and nor is it controversial. Okay. Now, at some point it's written down. At some point it is edited, redacted, recodified, and combined together. Once it's combined together, that's when it starts getting canonized. Because canonized is just a collection of books, different books, a library. So what you just said, Bart Ehrman never said. Bart Ehrman would never make that kind of mistake. He does not think that any council is the one who decided what books were in the Bible. That's a mistake. So what you said right there is misrepresenting Bart and a misunderstanding of his book, which I have read, and a misunderstanding of his course on that book, 2 different courses on this book, both of which I took. Not in person, but I paid for them, and I listened to them while jogging.
to deconstruct here is their claim that other groups died out because there weren't very many of them and they weren't true believers. Both those things are false. There were a lot of other people who called themselves Christians and followed their own version of Christ. The proto-Orthodox just didn't like their beliefs. If you take one
technically she's not wrong on that point.
thing from this, remember that the proto-Orthodox Christians are the grandfathers of using verbal and physical violence to squelch heretics to push their own belief structure.
That didn't happen until much, much later. But yes, we did have an Inquisition. We did have a crusade. We did have the War of the Roses. We did have the 30-Year War. We did have the 100-Year War. We did have Manifest Destiny and conquered the United States. I'm not sure what it's called for the conquest of New Spain. But yeah, all that happened. But that's nowhere near the time of Christ. That's 1,500 years later.
structure. The non-Proto-Orthodox Christians didn't die out because they didn't have the numbers. They died out because the Proto-Orthodox actively stamped them out by any means available. As the
Okay, no. The early church did not have the military or political power to kick anyone out. We had ecumenical meetings, we had councils, we had synods that decided what was and what wasn't orthodox. That's how we did it, by consensus. The same way scholarly consensus is derived today is the way theological consensus was derived in early church history, by everybody who was in charge getting together and talking about it, not through violence.
textbook says, the development of the canon of Scripture within Proto-Orthodox circles is in large part an attempt to define what true Christians should believe by eliminating or compromising the views of other groups. So instead of...
I would not say compromising. So any church group that would re-enter into the true church, we could, anything that was true, we could keep. So they would compromise they would negotiate really on what they were allowed to keep from their own private practice. So that's very different than what you're implying in your tone and in your mannerisms.
The lie that we were taught in Christianity, quote, the Christian scriptures did not drop from the sky one day in July, the year Jesus died, end quote.
Nobody says that. Nobody thinks that. If you thought that, then you are either severely naive or you were severely misled. But that is not a Christian teaching.
It was a giant fight between the Ebionites, the Marcionites, the Gnostics, and the...
It was not a giant fight. There's very little writings of the Gnostics. The Marcionite, I don't even know of any Marcionite writing. And Ebionites, I mean, that's just Judaizing. Judaizing exists today. So it's not a large fight. Wasn't even a large fight back then. Now, the Arian controversy, that was a large fight. Arianism totally kicked Christianity's butt for a long time, until one day Christianity woke up.
The winners, the Proto-Orthodox Christians, who brought us all the lies we're now deconstructing from. Let's go over what books the...
Okay, so the Orthodox Christians do not bring you lies. Have they made some mistakes and datings? Sure. Do Protestants misapply church teachings because they don't have context or of respect, a humbleness toward authority? Sure. But they're not lies. And if you read them, you can learn a lot about what the Bible actually says. In fact, a lot of the stuff that your secular scholar of choice says is actually stuff that he got from reading church fathers. So church fathers' commentaries talk about all these things, and they talk about them in very slow, very grave detail. But all this stuff is known in the early church. So yeah, you kind of have the wrong idea about things. I think you do you a lot of good to listen to some Jay Dyer. I don't like Jay Dyer personally. I find him offensive, but you're kind of offensive, so maybe you guys might get along.
Different pre-Christian groups considered holy, which is where the battle for power took place. The Ebionites, the believers who say you had to become Jewish to become Christian. They had the Old Testament, rejected the writings of Paul, and didn't know about the Gospels. We have the...
Well, they didn't know about the Gospels because the Gospels weren't written yet. The Ebionites are characters in the New Testament, so yeah, that what you're saying doesn't work.
The Marcionites, who believed in two gods, the Jewish one and the Christian one. They had a truncated...
Again, that's a misunderstanding of what the Marcionites believe, but yeah, okay.
New Testament of 11 books and rejected the Hebrew Bible. We have the Gnostics, who believe...
Damn it. Hold on. Be right back.
believed that the God other Christians worshipped was evil. They had their own canon of scripture, which we can finally read again today. Opposing all these three groups were the proto-Orthodox Christians, who are the precursors to today's Christians.
What does she mean we can finally read again today? This is not a complete. This isn't complete. These are just selections of different surviving texts. This is not an actual Bible. Some of these are completely opposed to each other. And I know she's not talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, there's literally grocery list in here. I think there's also like, not taxes, but I guess like a money thing in here or something. I don't know, I've been a long time since I've skimmed through that.
And who wiped the other ones off the face of the earth. They had the New Testament writings, but the 33 books weren't codified until 367 CE. Remember, Jesus supposedly died in 33 CE. It took.
That is a horrible understanding of history. There are early lists of the Bible. There are early lists of New Testament canon. Like early church. There was already an idea of what was and wasn't canon, what was and wasn't scripture, within the first 100 years of Christianity. So what she's saying is completely false. By the time you get to 200 years, I mean, it's all but solid. I think the only thing still being debated at that point would be the Book of Revelation, which barely sneaks in under the radar. But you can go back to see the church father discussions about which books are or are not canon. And in the earliest text, you got all the four gospels already. So yeah, I don't know what she's smoking.
Over 300 years to get the New Testament canon. Okay, so why is this even important? For me, deconstructing is about understanding the gaps in knowledge that were left out as I was raised Christian. No one would admit that there are other books considered holy that feature Jesus, but there are. What we were taught was not the only faith Christians believed in. And now, as a witch and energy worker, I believe that the energy...
My crap, brothers and sisters. Okay. So I'm going to lay this out for you really, really quick. There's no such thing as magic. You can't work energy. You can't vibe. All of that's false. All of that's bullshit. None of that's real. There is no magic. You're not a witch. You're just not. Now, you might identify as a witch. You might practice witchcraft. But none of those things have power. You can learn mild chemistry. You can learn basic herbology. Congratulations, that's still not magic. Magic's not real.
Beliefs and thought patterns of all those books are still attached to Christianity. Even the being we can...
Yeah, hold on, I'll be right back. Oy. Someone has my tea. Where's my tea? If anybody watching has a cure for headaches that's better than aspirin or Tylenol, let me know. Oh, man.
can connect to under the name Jesus has those thought patterns connected to him. And if you don't believe in energy, if you're an atheist, the metaphor holds.
I don't believe in energy. I'm a Christian. What you're talking is wooey bullshit. It's nonsense.
Christianity and the person of Jesus are what we say they are, understanding the entire scope of
Jesus, whether you believe he's God or not, was a real man who existed. The question is whether or not the Gospels accurately represent what he said, or they only represent a later development of the tradition. For it to be a later development, we need to establish that Q is a real freaking book. If Q is not real and all of the Gospels are written individually, they become eyewitness accounts. If Q is real and they're all basing it off Q, then Q is the eyewitness account, and everything else is just different people telling different versions of the same story. But it's all people trying to interpret or understand who the actual person of Christ was. It's a quest for understanding. It's not a dictation of what was, it's a quest to understand what may have been. Because Jesus is a mystery.
Belief helps wrestle the toxic tentacles from our brains. And that's what we're here for, right? Trying to get those toxic tentacles out of our brains.
Stop believing in magic and you'll get there. Oh, she does not look like a happy person.
Are you still using Google? Then I have something to show you.
Ugh, music and commercials. Okay, here we go. By the way, I've read this book. It's a great book. Don't let her nonsense deter you from reading this book. It's a good book.
Hello and welcome to my ex-Christian Bible study secular deconstructing bonanza. I'm here to help you deconstruct. We're diving in.
You're here to lie and misinterpret. Congratulations, you've already done that twice. You've lied about Bart Ehrman and you've misinterpreted things that he said. And you've conflated history and you denied, or actually straight up lied and said that the Council of Nicaea decided what books were and weren't in the Bible. That happened long before Nicaea. Okay, continuing on. Unless you're suddenly Catholic and only things that the Catholics rule on can be accepted as truth, which in that case, you need to go to confession, young lady.
Into the textbook, The New Testament, by Dr. Bart D. Ehrman, ex-Christian and biblical historian. I highly suggest you follow him on social media, get the book, and follow me too, of course, as I deconstruct.
I recommend you never follow her. Go follow Bart Ehrman. Go buy all of his books. Go listen to all of his audiobooks. Then read the Bible. Then read a good Bible commentary like the Oxford 5th edition, or I say commentary, but study Bible, Oxford 5th edition, annotated version, Ecumenical Bible, study Bible, or the Harper 1 SBL study Bible. Then go read the Church Fathers one by one. I recommend if you're just interested in Jesus, read the commentaries on the New Testament. There's about 100 different commentaries by the Church Fathers. Read all of that, and then you're good to go. Or, just read the Bible and go to church. Whatever. Pick a path. Don't pick hers.
Instruct and share my spiritual journey. I cannot wait to dive into chapter 2 with you, entitled, Do We Have the Original Testament? Because, of course, the answer is...
I would be very clear. Chapter 2 was one of my favorite chapters. There's another chapter in there, too, that I really loved. So, her misinterpreting it in the most negative way possible, don't worry about it.
Let's talk about how the New Testament writings got passed down from when they were written in the 1st and 2nd centuries to now. We're living in the digital age where you can copy and paste the misspelling ridden text from your ex all over social media with very little effort. So we forget that people didn't have that luxury for over a dozen centuries. Remember that the printing press was invented in the 1400s.
I read all this stuff for the first time around 2001, 2002. And I was reading all of this stuff until it became audiobooks for me and podcasts up until, I don't know, maybe 2017, 2018. So I just didn't have that problem. If I thought about mass production, I thought about newspapers and books. I didn't think about the internet.
Before that, every single book had to be copied by hand. By hand. So in order for you to have that impeccable looking leather-bound edition of the Bible with the fancy fonts and the pretty margins, massive amounts of scribbling had to be done over and over and over for a millennium. We have none of the original copies of the New Testament writings, which means that what we have are copies of copies of copies. We also know that the scribes weren't.
I want to be very clear. The first part of that sentence was her nonsense. The second part of that was a direct quote from Bart Ehrman, which is copies of copies of copies. And the way that he says it is more humble and more entertaining because he has that little stutter.
Perfect, and that God did not inspire thousands upon thousands of people to not make one single mistake. How do we know this? Because we have
That's not what inspiration means.
riddled manuscripts with tons of differences. We have about 5,700 manuscripts of the New Testament. Most of them are from the Middle Ages, which means dozens of copies were made between the originals and them. Between the
Yeah, but that's the same thing for all of my Roman and Greek shelf of ancient history. Almost all of those, sometimes only one or two copies from either medieval Europe or from France, from actually pretty close to modern time France. And then every once in a while, you'll find a slightly older copy in a Orthodox monastery or some kind of sweetheart, go away, please. She's in heat. I'm trying to put her on the other side of the house, and my dad keeps putting her back over here. So yeah, that's fun, especially when I have a headache. Anyway, yeah. So you might go to a monastery and find an old copy. You might, if you're lucky, some kids burning books for heat will turn out to be ancient manuscripts that you can then use. But yeah, I'm gonna let her talk while I try and put the cat away again for the third time.
manuscripts we have, there are approximately 1.7 million differences. Some of those differences are just people not knowing how to spell resurrection, but some are more significant. In fact, some of those differences are missing and added verses of today's most well-known parts of the New Testament. Why? Because some of the changes weren't accidental. There are actually three reasons for a difference. The first is straight up a mistake. The second is somebody thinking that the person he's copying from made a mistake and he's going to fix it, thus introducing a mistake. And the third is somebody not liking what was written there and changing it to fit his idea of what Jesus or Paul said or did. That one's a purposeful misleading of the reader to change what the original said. I will add that these are not unique to the New Testament, but to all books scholars have from antiquity. But still, the answer to the question, do we have the original New Testament, is a resounding absolutely not. Let's talk about some of the significant differences. Original said. I will add that that one's approaching it to fit his idea of what Jesus and he's and added verses of today's most well-known parts of the New Testament. Why? Because some of the changes weren't accidental.
So, yeah, there are added portions to the Bible. The amount of added portions to the Bible, and Bart Ehrman says this himself, if you take them away, make no significant difference to the Bible or to Christology. They just don't. And the way that the church works, this would be the Catholic Church, but the church in general, is that if the stories are in line with the tradition and they fit, we can sanctify them, we can bless them. And so that's what we did. So those portions are squared off, and they're usually written in italics, and they're usually marked off with the brackets, and let you know that's not part of the original text, but it's still edifying for you to read because it teaches a good moral lesson in line with Christianity. That's why they're in there. And again, as Catholics and as Orthodox, we do not deny that the Bible is completely inspired by God and also completely the work of human hands.
Accidental. There are actually three reasons for a difference. The first is straight up a mistake.
The majority of the mistakes are just spelling errors. The next most common one is where the lines kind of like bleed into each other or they get flipped around. As a dyslexic person, believe me, I understand that a lot. And then also word order or spelling order changes. And sometimes little marks or asterisks or little accents are missing. There's no punctuation, so that doesn't even matter. In a way, you can even think about it. Anytime you see a Bible with punctuation, those are all additions to the Bible because there is no punctuation in the Bible. Anytime you see chapter divisions or numbering, all of that's added in. So yeah, don't let this person scare you off.
The second is somebody thinking that the person he's copying from made a mistake and he's going to fix it, thus introducing a mistake. And the third is somebody not liking what
I don't like it when the way that Bart Ehrman says it, the way she says it is even worse. But sometimes you would see someone else's mistake and so you would fix it. And then someone else would think that the original was better, so they'll fix it back. And since we don't have an original, we're just kind of feeling based on who said what. But here's a really interesting experiment, and pretty much all scholars can agree with this. You take all the Bible verses that are preserved in the church fathers. You can actually rebuild the entire Bible completely. So what is our marker? What keeps us on the right path in translation? It's tradition. Tradition keeps us on the right path.
was written there and changing it to fit his idea of what Jesus or Paul said or did. That one's a purposeful misleading of the reader to change what the original said. I will add that these are not unique to the New Testament, but to all books scholars have from antiquity. But still, the answer to the question, do we have the original?
Which I said that at the opening.
Original New Testament is a resounding absolutely not. Let's talk about...
And again, like I said, we can reconstruct it based on what the church fathers have written. So we can compare what we have with what they had, and we can see that it matches up fairly well. And no significant change in doctrine, dogma, or Christology, or hermeneutics for that matter. So, yeah.
Some of the significant differences there are between the hundreds of ancient New Testament manuscripts scholars are in possession of. This is one of my favorite parts. I love examples. And here are some examples of verses we all know and love that aren't actually in the Bible. The first example is that the last 12 verses of the book of Mark were added by a scribe at some point because the original version added too abruptly for their liking. As we know, 3 women go...
And there is an apologetic out there about how he could have just added that later. You don't have a way to show that that's not part of the original author's writing. You have a way to show that it's not part of the original manuscript. Well, you have a way to theorize, but because you don't have an original, you're still speculating. Strong speculation, but still speculation, and still an argument from consensus, not an argument from evidence.
Go to find the tombstone rolled away, and some random dude man in a robe is sitting to the side to tell them not to be afraid. Verse 7 says, "But go tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." And verse 8 says, "Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing."
Now, the more interesting stuff is when you get passages that only start showing up after the Middle Ages. That's when it's more interesting. When it's stuff like this, you're arguing over non-evidentials, which doesn't make any sense.
Nothing to anyone because they were afraid. And that's where the writer of Mark ends the story. Interesting, no? But somebody didn't...
Every Bible that I've ever seen has this denotated as the longer and shorter ending. Even in older liturgies, they mark it as the longer and shorter ending. No one's hiding this information.
Like it, and added 12 more verses about Jesus appearing and appearing and appearing and then getting taken up into heaven. Nope, none of that was originally in there. So the second example I have for you is Luke 22. Jesus is waiting to be arrested before his trial and crucifixion. In verse 42, he says, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. The truth is that "Father, take this cup from me," is in the older manuscripts. But the two next verses about the angel appearing and the sweat falling to the ground like blood were not.
She's just reading from his book and then misinterpreting what he's saying. If you can't interpret Bart Ehrman correctly, who doesn't write very mysteriously, how are you supposed to interpret the Bible correctly?
It's interesting because sweating blood is a commonly known idiom in the English language, and this is where it originally comes from. Yet, it was not in the original version of the Gospel. The author is some unknown scribe who added it later. The third and final example I'll share is about the story of Jesus and the adulterous woman. You know, the one about he who is without sin should cast the first stone. That entire story doesn't appear in the older manuscript.
We all know this, and yet we still accept it.
That's right. One of the most famous, oft-retold stories wasn't in the original at all. Someone inserted it, and like a viral meme, it took off. But Dr. Ehrman, I hear you saying, how do scholars actually know what's a real verse and what's a fake verse compared to the original, since we don't have...
While that sounds like a good question, that's a straw man attack against Christians. So you can see when something gets added in, because when it shows up in the date of when things are being written, and you can actually see the scribes arguing over it. But again, even if you take all the verses that are added out, it changes nothing of Christology or Christianity. Now, Bart Ehrman makes the claim that there are 3 or 4 that do, but when you hear him argue it out, it's not that impressive. She's acting like all of these things add to the collectively add up to a unreliable Bible, which doesn't make any sense because it doesn't make any of these other historical works unreliable. You'd have to call everything unreliable and go into ultra skepticism, so that doesn't work.
The originals. I'm glad you asked because it's a good question and he gives us a good answer. Okay, let's say they've got all these different manuscripts that overlap one book of the Bible. One's from 400 CE, 100 are from 1500 CE, and they've got a bunch between those two time frames. They're going to look at each of them, see where the verses are different, and decide which one is true to the original. First, the older ones are usually closer to the source, so scholars give them a lot of weight. What does the one from 400 CE say? It's been copied fewer times and has had less time for scribes inserting their, interesting opinions. Second...
So she's making it way more complicated than what it is. It's really simple. Somebody writes something that starts showing up in, let's say, 1080, and you have a manuscript on you that's from 154, a fragment, and the fragment doesn't have what your later one has. Well, you know, it was added in. Now, if we find an older piece that has it in, well, now we can say, well, then it was just missing from that middle piece. That's it. It's the oldest date for when something first shows up. That's how we're making these decisions. Now, sometimes, and unfortunately more than just sometimes, we're also speculating using literary clues. And when we do that, there's not so much proof as there is theory. But theory doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that we can't prove it. It's a hypothesis and a theory.
Where did they find the manuscripts? If they have 40 from this one little island, and those are different than the other 100 we get from all over the world, then those 40 are probably a local variant. They assume that the ones that are
also, the way she's making it sound and the way she's moving her hands makes it sound like some kind of mystic thing. You want to see the exact same thing today? Look at different updated editions of the NRSV. They change. Sometimes just a minor word. And every time there's a change, people get up in arms. When Jerome changed to the Vulgate, people got upset. When different writers update things, people get upset. But if you look at anything from the NLT to the KJV to the CSB to the NAB, they're all different translations in English of the same Bible. And yet they don't exactly match up. So you don't need to just go with scribal error. You can just look at translation and interpretation. People understand things differently, which she's clearly demonstrating with her nonsense.
Distributed across the world are probably more correct. Third, what about style? I speak and write a certain way, and someone trying to put words in my mouth may not do a good job at it. So if the verses sound nothing like how Paul writes elsewhere, chances are Paul didn't write them. Fourth, if
I don't like that method of interpreting whether or not something was or wasn't written. I've spoken out against this before. You can read books by same authors who are written completely different from each other, even though it's the exact same author writing each book. Look at George Lucas. Some of his writing's great, some of it's terrible. Then, on the other hand, you can look at writing teams where every single book sounds the same, even though it's a different person writing every time in a series. So, I don't like this argument. I don't think this method is as scientific as people say it is. I think it's more skill and more art.
everything's lining up to say that one manuscript is correct, and that manuscript says stuff that goes against the doctrines of the church, someone may have read the original, decided they didn't like it, and changed it to make it better. An older manuscript containing something church apologists don't like is probably actually the truer one. And finally, after considering
That's definitely not that's no one's opinion. No one thinks that. She added that herself.
everything else, some manuscripts are just a hot mess. If, using the other criteria, scholars figure out that a part of a document is full of errors, that calls into question the rest of the document. So to answer the question, do we have the original New Testament? The answer is a resounding no, but with caveats. Scholars have pieced it together as best they can, but it's impossible to recreate the entire thing.
Again, we can actually do that really easy by going with what the church fathers had and seeing how closely their commentary matches to what's being written. Because when they write their commentaries, they wrote the gospel up and up, and then they write their commentary on it underneath, because there was no numbering. So to keep track, they'd have to write down what it is that they were talking about.
Which means we have to take everything
You may not know about the church fathers.
we learn with a grain of salt. That means the Bible is not inerrant. It's errant. It's very, very errant, which is fine if you use it to inform your
That's just an opinion.
worldview instead of using it to barricade you in as some kind of rigid, inflexible truth.
The quantum computer, they're calling it,
can compute many times faster than the current breed of supercomputers.
What kind of world was the New Testament written in? How is it different than our world today? And why does it even matter? Hello, and welcome to my ex-Christian deconstructing Bible study bonanza. I am here
Welcome to the nonsense that I'm speaking because I'm angry and I have a grudge against a religion I never truly understood.
to help you deconstruct. We're diving into the textbook, The New Testament, by Dr. Bart D. Ehrman, ex-Christian and biblical historian. I highly suggest you follow him on social media, get this book, and follow me too, of course, as I deconstruct and share my spiritual journey. We're going into the third chapter today called The Greco-Roman World of Early Christian Traditions, and I want to start out with why it's so important. When Christianity was created, things were way, way different than they are today. There's this, what I would...
Okay, Christianity wasn't created, it developed. Developed out of Judaism and it developed through Jesus. Then it was guided by Paul. Then you had the church fathers. First the ante-Nicene fathers, and then the Nicene fathers, and the church fathers from there. Then you have the ecumenical councils guiding it all throughout their way. So all of her that she's saying is wrong.
Would call immature outlook being perpetuated by evangelical churches that everything is, was, and will be the same as it is today. So an important thing
I mean, we can agree that evangelicals and Protestants get it wrong. So sure.
we have to deconstruct is the notion that society in which Christianity developed was the same as it is today, because it wasn't. And once we start to understand the world as it was in the first century, the Christian worldview starts to fall apart naturally. Let's start with the idea that everyone has to believe the same thing because A, there's only one truth, and B, the one truth is a progression from incorrect, savage beliefs to correct, enlightened ways of being civilized. Dr. Ehrman traces this back to Alexander the Great, who went a-conquerin' in the late 300s BCE. So this started about 400 years before Christianity really began.
What did she just say? What the heck did she just say?
And taking off.
Let's go back. Hold on.
These were way started today, too, of course, as I deconstruct and share my spiritual journey. We're going into the third chapter today called The Greco-Roman World of Early Christian Traditions, and I want to start out with why it's so important. When Christianity was created, things were way, way different than they are today. There's this, what I would call, immature outlook being perpetuated by evangelical churches that everything is, was, and will be the same as it is today. So an important thing we have to deconstruct is the notion that society in which Christianity developed was the same as it is today, because
I feel like she's being incredibly dishonest. I mean, who is claiming that ancient Greek and Roman society matches today's society? Or who's even trying to say that? I mean, the human mind hasn't evolved from then, so we still think the same. But our knowledge base is different, our culture is different, our society is different. We don't even speak the same language. Don't know what she's talking about.
it wasn't. And once we start to understand the world as it was in the first century, the Christian worldview starts to fall apart naturally. Let's start with the idea that everyone has to believe the same thing because A, there's only one truth, and B, the one truth is
There is only one truth. Not everybody has to believe it. Anybody can believe whatever they want, but there is only one actual truth. There can only be one standard, only one shekel in the sanctuary.
progression from incorrect, savage beliefs to correct.
Got news for you. That's a Roman term, not a Christian term.
Enlightened ways of being civilized. Dr. Ehrman traces this back to Alexander the Great, who went a-conquerin' in the late 300s BCE. So
I don't get what she's saying there. I'm going to play it again.
And B, the one truth is a progression from incorrect, savage beliefs to correct, enlightened ways of being civilized. Dr. Ehrman.
The Enlightenment is, you're talking about pre- and Reformation thinking, pre-Reformation and Reformation thinking. So there's no way to trace that back to, you can't trace that back to Alexander the Great. I mean, you can, if you want to call Neoplatonic and Neo-Aristotelian thought, maybe even Neo-Pythagorean thought, which has survived through Aramaic Islamic thought, I think it's reintroduced to Christianity during the Crusades. No, I'm not seeing it. I'm sorry. That's too many dots to connect. That's too many strings to reconnect after severing. The Enlightenment rediscovers the ancient world for the West, at the same time that the Eastern world, which had preserved it, is collapsing and rejecting it. The Catholic Church preserves a lot of these writings. The one specific sect in Islam preserves a lot of these writings, but there are preservations and they're not exact copies. And in the Italian Renaissance and the French Renaissance spent a lot of time rediscovering and rewriting all these things into a language that's readable. I believe they translated into Latin, and we're assuming that they're translating properly.
traces this back to Alexander the Great, who went a-conquerin' in the late 300s BCE. So this started about 400 years before Christianity really began taking off. Everywhere he went, Alexander brought with him Greek philosophy and society, and people bought it.
He wasn't the first one to do that, and he wasn't the last one either. There were different waves. And Babylon did that. That's why Israel is so influenced by Babylon. Samaria did that. Assyria did that. Egypt did that. Ancient Greece did that. The Hellenes did it. The Dorians did it. The Mongols did it. I mean, China did it to Japan. I don't see what that has to do with. Alexander the Great helped spread pancreation into India, which then spread into, which combining with yoga spread into China, which led to Kung Fu, what we call Kung Fu, but Wushu, which then led to karate, which then led to Taekwondo. But I wouldn't say that karate, I wouldn't say that jiu-jitsu is Brazilian jiu-jitsu is Japanese jiu-jitsu, and I wouldn't say that the karate and jiu-jitsu of Japan is the martial arts of China, and the martial arts of China is not the Indian martial arts, the wrestling, and that Indo wrestling is definitely not Mediterranean pancreation. Connected, yes, but not the same thing. And like I said, I've read this book and I've heard 2 different courses from him on this book. I don't think you're understanding that what he's talking about correctly. I think he's just using an example. I think he was using Alexander the Great as an example of how culture influences itself, or how culture spreads and how influences happen.
Into it because that's how the rich were living in the land he was from. Let's set up cities, let's set up centers, let's set up Hellenized culture, because that's how the elite.
I really do think you're just misunderstanding Bart Ehrman explaining the spread of information in the ancient world.
Do it in the cool, fancy places. This is a non-religious idea we still have today. New York is awesome. Los Angeles is fantastic. Des Moines is the center of culture in Iowa, as small town me believed in the early 90s. I live in a suburb of Toronto now. There's another example. It's the supposed epicenter of urban living in Canada. All of this can be solidly traced back to Alexander. It's probably been around for as long as cities.
What she's saying makes no sense. Alexander the Great's in the history of the world, he's a late coming person. This cultural influence has been true going all the way back to the earliest days of trade. Just keep making my headache worse.
Have existed, but we're talking about what we can trace historically. So to tie this in with Christianity, everyone has to believe the same thing. Everyone has to live the same way. And the higher you are in the social hierarchy, the better you are. Christianity
Doesn't teach that at all. You want to be the servant of servants. The higher you are, the more corrupt you are. You want to be humble.
Christianity was developed in a milieu where all these things were taken as a given. But it's not actually a given. Think for a moment how each of us has our own unique path, and that money and status don't buy happiness. This is something we know now, but as ex-Christians and people living in today's society, we used to live as though status and conformity were God's will. This part right here.
Well, Christians don't believe in classes or classism. There is no distinction between rich and poor, between Greek and Jew. It's the whole point of Christianity. Status is not important at all. Faith is. Whatever religion you grew up in, they did not properly teach you religion or did not treat you properly.
Here is seeing the water we little fishies are swimming.
There's a reason why the Pope washes the feet of a poor person every Easter.
Let's talk about how the ancient world where Christianity developed differed from today's world in terms of religious and spiritual beliefs.
I'm really scared about what she's going to say here because I love the ancient world. I spend most of my late 20s and almost all of my 30s researching the ancient world. So I'm very scared about what she's going to say here because she seems to know nothing.
Beliefs. I'll remind you that in ancient Greece and Rome, the people there were believers in many gods, also known as polytheism, a belief I personally subscribe to. I'll have a little more about that.
I'm curious. I'd like to debate you on your understanding of Greek and Roman. Well, I'm not an expert in Roman, so let's go Greek. I would love to debate you on Greek religion and Greek understanding. Yeah. If we ever talked, I would love to talk to you and either dialogue with you or debate with you on exactly how Greek theology worked and about the status of the gods and who were and weren't gods and what the gods were.
In a moment, but first there are some key aspects about how they worship those gods that we need to bear in mind. As Dr. Ehrman says on page 49, for most ancient persons, religion was not the way to guarantee an afterlife.
She's still in the beginning of the book. I'm going to read one page of the Bible and say I'm an expert in Christianity. How's that sound? Ugh.
Life. It was a way to secure life in the here and now. On page 50, the gods were not impressed by anyone's beliefs about them, nor did they require people to say the proper creed or acknowledge the proper truths. What mattered was how people showed their devotion to the gods. On page 47, there was no such thing as separation of church and state. Since the gods made the state great, the state responded by encouraging and sponsoring the worship of the gods. Page 53, there was no sense of exclusivity in Greco-Roman religions, no sense that one group's gods were real and another group's false, that a person...
Hold on, that is completely untrue. So to worship another group's gods was a great, heresy is the wrong word, but I don't have a better word for it. It was a great offense in the ancient Greek world. If you worshipped another city's gods, it was practically betraying that city, betraying your own city, betraying your own patron. And if you were dedicated to one patron, you were not supposed to go pray to another patron. Complete heresy. Like a real problem if you did that. If you were dedicated to one god, you couldn't just jump to another god. That doesn't mean that you don't partake in rituals and festivals or anything like that, but who you worship to, who you were dedicated to, who your patron was, all of that mattered significantly. And violating those vows was a huge deal. So I don't know what she's talking about, because that is not actual history. That's present in a lot of fantasy and a lot of fiction, but in actuality, you would only pray to your household god, pray to your city god, pray to your family god, and pray to your personal patron. It's only the Romans who broke that down and violated those norms and started adopting in other gods.
Person had to convert to certain gods or be punished. That meant that in their society, their ruling class was inseparable from their church leaders. Depending on the region you were in, the ruler was seen as one of the gods, and offering and sacrifices were given to the divine part of him so that he could continue to keep the people he ruled over safe. But when I say he was seen as one of the gods, there was a hierarchy to this. He wasn't seen as on par with Zeus by any means. He was lower in the pyramid from the gods of Olympus or even the gods of the city. At the top of the pyramid, we have what many scholars and philosophers of the time saw as the one true god, who was so supernaturally foreign and unapproachable as to be pointless in everyday life. Remember, the point of ancient religion, if we can call...
That's not... Nope. No. That is not right. So what she did is she shrunk all of ancient paganism into one pyramid. That's not how that works. There are some ancient pagans that believed in an ultimate top god, but most of them didn't. That's a later development. In fact, whenever that idea would come in, it would be rejected, like Etan in Egypt. So what she's saying there is incorrect, completely incorrect. Yeah, no, that's really wrong. This right here, like the unknown God, that was a really cool trick that Paul did. But that's not what the pagans meant by the unknown God. It was a placeholder for in case we're missing a god in our ritual, so that we don't anger that particular god. And Paul jujitsu'd it into, oh, no, this is the one true one. So, again, she doesn't know what she's talking about.
Call it that since it's a modern invention, was to create a secure life now. There was rampant disease, many deaths in childbirth, and all the ancient ick that we're familiar with. Who cares?
Okay, the ancient world was not that terrible. Go watch any of Metatron's video on the ancient world. I'd recommend books, but you're clearly not going to read them. So go and watch these videos on what the ancient world was actually right. It wasn't a terrible place. People weren't dying all over the place. There were dentists, there were eye doctors, there were physicians. Yeah, their science was whack. Their medication didn't always work, but these things existed. These problems have existed since mankind has existed, and solutions to these problems have existed for just as long. The viability of those solutions are what led to the evolution of science and are what led to societies being more or less successful, including warfare and military tech and all of that stuff. So you're just wrong. On every level, you're just wrong.
It's about the afterlife when 4 of your 5 kids are almost guaranteed to die before reaching adulthood. So the
ancient world had plumbing. The ancient world had irrigation. We're not as advanced as you think. Computers and cars don't make us that advanced. AI might be a kicker, but that's a different story.
people especially didn't care much about this one true lofty god that was uninterested in helping make their existence on Earth better. That was the domain of the philosophers. Next were the great gods: Zeus, Hera, Artemis, Apollo, Hecate, which is the goddess I'm devoted to. They all fall into this category. They were concerned with human life, and the stories told about them showed that they had things in common with humanity. Next was a class of local gods.
The fact that she understands what being dedicated to a god is means that she knows she's being dishonest when she says this. She's just being hateful and spiteful.
Gods and daemoniae, who were even more involved with human life when they wanted to be. These were still unembodied creatures who had their own agenda and culture outside of humans, but could be petitioned and persuaded to intervene if one did it correctly. Finally, there were the divine beings that incarnated as human, and the demigods that were half human and half immortal. The emperor, the ruling class, and the heroes spoken about in the ancient classics all fell into this category. They were more than human, but less than the gods, and this was very important to how Christianity was viewed by the Romans.
So in the ancient world, the people who actually followed these religions, the theory was all of these are actually human beings that lived long ago and died off. And that they became fableized or memorialized or immemorialized in a way in the telling of their tales. That's the atheistic thought of that time, or the secular thought of that time. Those who believed, the true believers, took it very seriously and thought the gods were very real. It was not just, it wasn't just superstition for them.
As it developed, Jesus, as a person born of a woman and a god, was seen as existing on this tier. There was a place for him, and his story made sense in their stories. If Christianity
Jesus did not make sense in their stories. That's where the controversy happens. Read Tertullian to understand how much this was confusing for pagans and how much they hated it.
Christianity hadn't in some way fit into this worldview, it would have been seen as nonsensical.
It was seen as nonsensical. It was seen as completely insane. It still is seen as nonsensical and insane by atheists and, I'm guessing, by people like you.
Go out on a limb here and say that this worldview came first, and that the stories of Jesus and others like him, more on that in the next video, were developed from this logic.
Okay, this video is my lowest watched video of all time, and I'm an hour and 30 minutes in. So there's nobody watching this right now. So I'm going to go ahead and call it a night. I have a terrible headache, and she's talking nonsense. I might continue with her tomorrow, or I might move on to Michael Lofton. All right, and I still have Eva Lupine and the BDSM stuff I have to talk about, so we might do that. Maybe tomorrow we'll do Michael Lofton, and the next day we'll do Eva Lupine. All right, everybody have a good night, and I'm sorry this one wasn't a winner. I thought what she was saying was interesting. I thought it was good to counter this, but Apparently, you all do not think so. So I'll move on tomorrow to something more relevant and more entertaining. Thank you all, and good night.
Yeah. Everybody knows that I'm breaking down. Everybody knows I ain't faking now. Everybody knows my heart's vacant now. Yeah, she hates me now, I made mistakes, but now I don't ever wanna be alone. I don't really ever feel at home. On my own, in the zone, that's the only way I know. Feeling low, about to blow back up. Here I won't ever let the doubt creep in. Gotta pop a couple more aspirin. I don't think I'll ever let you in. Easier to break it off best friends. I don't really understand myself. I don't really understand, need help. I don't wanna be left on the shelf. Couldn't even hear me if I yelled. It's so cold outside, I'm alone, I'm alright. It's so cold outside, I'm alone, I'm alright. It's so cold outside.
Okay. So anybody who left the room, psych. So I'm going to do something a little different. Again, I still have a terrible headache. I'm very tired. But I'm going to do something a little different real quick. I want to talk to you about my faith. Something I don't do on this channel, but since reviewing this lady's material turned everybody off and no one's really watching, this is a good chance for me to try this out. So as you know, I'm a Catholic, I'm a Christian, I believe in Jesus Christ. I got 2 more videos to do on my why is segments. I have why I believe the Bible is true, why I believe Christianity is true. I have why I believe the church is true next, and then why I believe God is true. Those are my next 4 videos after the one I'm doing right now on inspiration. But let me talk to you a little bit about Jesus Christ. It's something I don't really do on this channel. So, Jesus is God. He's the Son of the Father. He's the Logos, the divine word. The Trinity is the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And God has saved my life multiple times. He's helped me out of insane situations, from me having an outer body experience, from me being jumped to the point that my heart stopped when I was getting beat up as a kid. I was jumped by a group of, I think, 3 kids. They bashed my head against a metal post, and that was it. I was dead. And God brought me back for whatever reason. And multiple times in my life, I've been on death's door and survived everything from being a preemie at birth and being born way too early to like before my hormones had actually settled in, to me surviving driving off a expressway. That's a fun story, huh? And an unfinished highway that was getting repaired, and me and my friend survived. So, you know, I really do believe God is real and Jesus is real. I prayed to God, you know, and everybody on my channel knows about me losing my ability to walk and me gaining it back, and how prayer was a major part of that, and how me asking God to heal me in a certain time frame, and I would do a certain thing, and then it happening. It's huge. But I've also experienced all the dark stuff, man. My mom and my sister died when I was very young. I went through about 100 deaths. And even going through all of this stuff, I never lost faith in God. And the hardest part about being a Christian is also the best part about being a Christian. It's forgiveness. It's hard to forgive yourself, and it's hard to forgive an enemy. It's easy to forgive someone that you yourself have wronged. That's easy. That's the easy stuff. That's not the hard stuff. The hard stuff is forgiving yourself when you make a mistake. The hard stuff is forgiving yourself when you've been wrong in such a way that it hurts not just yourself but other people. That's hard. And Jesus helps you do that. Faith in God helps you do that. You know, a lot of the atheists out there like to talk about how the Bible is evil and corrupt. Well, I got news for you. Before I read the Bible, I was evil and corrupt. Reading the Bible pulled me away from my worst inclinations. Reading the Quran saw me, pointed me toward those inclinations that I'd walked away from. That's how I knew it was wrong. Reading these books, well, fun. I love the Iliad. I love the Odyssey. Didn't teach me morals. They gave me maybe one or two pieces of advice, but it didn't guide me, not in that way. Maybe influenced my personality a little bit, but that's about it. I still want to be Odysseus, even at my age. But Odysseus is an unreliable narrator. Jesus is not. We're talking in literary terms. The Bible is not an unreliable narration. It's a reliable narration. You're supposed to believe the author. You're supposed to believe the writer. Now, does that make it true or not true? No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about faith. We're talking about God. We're talking about ultimate reality here. So just because the Bible is using literary techniques that are interesting and inspiring doesn't make it inspired. We believe it is inspired. That's belief. That's faith. Belief cannot be measured in scholarly books. It doesn't matter how many anachronisms you find in the Bible. So what is the Bible message? Well, if you look at the Old Testament, is that God loves and chose a certain people. And because he loved this one person, he also loved his whole family and promised to protect them for all time. That doesn't mean that God didn't love other people. For instance, Melchizedek. That doesn't mean that God doesn't grant other people high status. For instance, Darius, in letting out the, is Darius or Nebuchadnezzar? Whichever one let out the Jews. He's a Messiah. He's a Christ. But he's not the Christ. See, the Christ spread a different word. He said, be perfect like your Father in heaven is perfect. You don't need to worry about all the other stuff. God's already forgiven you for all that you've done. Now you have a clean slate. Now, don't sin again. Don't sin again. He gave you a command. He gave you an order. Don't sin again. So every time that you sin again, he refreshes you and goes, okay, now don't sin again. And he'll forgive as many times as he has to. There's only one unforgivable sin, and nobody knows what it is. So what is the message of Jesus? It's really simple. God loves you, and God forgives you. Now, sin no more. Change your ways. Give up everything that you own, and follow me. Follow Jesus Christ. That's the message. And I have struggled with that. I have tried to do that. And I've run into false Christians who believe in things like the prosperity gospel or the gospel of grace and other stuff like that. And it's been really hard to be a Christian when you're around false Christians, because you can pray together, but they're praying for money and you're praying to go to heaven. It's two very different prayers. And you find yourself after a while being influenced by the false Christians to pray for things like money and wealth. And that's a problem. So to me, it's very important to remember that when God says he's going to heal you, he's not talking about physical ailments. He's talking about your spirit. When God says you're going to live forever, he doesn't mean your physical body. He means after you die, you get to be one with him. And yes, it will be a body and physical resurrection on the last day. Guess what? It's not the last day. And if we always live in the constant present, then it's always the first day and it's always the last day. So when we die, maybe we go directly to heaven as far as we understand it, even if it's been thousands or millions or billions of years. But we don't know, and we can't know. That's why it has to be done on faith. But yeah, I just wanted to try that out. I haven't done a lot of religious talk on this channel. And as my channel is now growing, I think I should start talking about religion, considering I have focused on religion on the outskirts of it for a while now. And I do plan on going back to school for my degree in that topic. So let me know if you enjoyed this last part for anyone who watched it. And I'm about to sign off in about a minute, unless someone has questions or comments. Okay. All right. I think we're good. I love you all. Peace. And tomorrow we'll have a more interesting video, and we'll have Michael Lofton as our watch topic. I just wanted to really talk about this lady's interpretation of Bart Ehrman, but apparently nobody else did. Peace, like, and subscribe. I love you all. Remember, Jesus loves you. Remember, Jesus died for you. And remember that no matter how many hateful people talk to you, you're better than them. And you're better than them every time, because they're giving in to hate. And all you got to do to be better than them is forgive them. Be humble. They demand something of you. Do it, even if it's painful. Be the better person. Preach the gospel. Yes, that means submitting to authority. Yes, that means eating shit. That means taking the shit job. That means doing the thing the person that you don't like wants you to do. And smiling about it, and being kind to them, and praying for them that they come to Christ. Being Christian is not about being rich. It's not about authority. It's not about position or status. If that's what you think Christianity is, you're very, very wrong. Christianity is about loving God first. It's about loving yourself. That means not sinning. That means taking care of yourself, exercising, eating right. That's what almost all the laws in the Torah are about. I know differentiating yourself from the rest of the group, yes, but it's also about being healthy. A kosher diet is a healthy diet, just as a Mediterranean kosher diet is a very healthy diet. Exercising, taking care of yourself, working, having a job, that's very Christian and very Jewish. Then you get into things like loving your neighbor. That means hoping for the best for them and not coveting things that are theirs. And you get to things like loving your enemy, which means forgiving those who have hurt you. And a lot of times the person who has hurt you the most is yourself. So forgive yourself. And the measure that you forgive others, including yourself, is the measure that God will forgive you. All right. I think that's about it for tonight again. And peace. Love you all.